Now, my husband, Alex, will tell you that I could tell a million mother-in-law stories that would have you just shaking your head and saying, mm-hmm, and every one of them would be absolutely true. Like the first time she came to dinner. I was pouring the rice in the pan and she said, "Oh, don't you want to pour the rice in the pan after the water boils?" And when we were on the pier and my husband, who was a naval officer, was leaving for 6 months, I am very pregnant, waddling around. My mother-in-law darts ahead to my husband to spend time with him, time that I did not spend, knowing that he was not going to be there for the birth of our daughter. And I do resent these things a little, but I have to say that I might not be telling the whole truth, because even though my mother-in-law, Joan, is a tough cookie, I too am a tough cookie. And it is possible that as I poured that rice in the pan, I might have looked her straight in the eye and smiled. And maybe, perhaps, I might have been the one who, when she was on that pier, taking that moment away from me, I invited her to the pier against my husband's better judgment. So the truth of the matter is I actually understand her quite well, and perhaps am maybe somewhat like her. I mean, I did understand her. I understood her. She came from a very segregated Washington, D.C. It is understandable why she might be uncomfortable that her son was going to be involved in an interracial relationship. From what she knew, this did not go well. And she went to the Dunbar, what was considered the academic high school in DC, Dunbar High School. There we go. And it was always her plan to go to Dunbar High School and then to go to Howard and to become a doctor. But here's the thing, Joan was brilliant, actually too brilliant for her plan. She graduated at 16 years old. And at 16 years old, her mother did not want her going off into the big bad world. And after a lot of negotiating, which is translated as arguing, she ended up at a small nursing school in Philadelphia. And this nursing school was actually, this was more like a cloistered nunnery than any kind of college. It was very regulated. You got up in the morning, you put on your uniform, you showed up on time. And this is the sort of environment where Joan flourished. And she graduated as a registered nurse. And it wasn't long after that she met an Air Force officer and married him, and was torn out of the cosmopolitan East Coast cities, and ended up in Greenville, Mississippi. And while there is segregation in Washington, D.C., there is segregation in Greenville, Mississippi. And of course, going down there, the ambitious person she is, she waltzes right up to the hospital to get a job and realizes, as she is accepted for this job, that she is the senior ranking nurse in the entire hospital. And when I say the entire hospital, this hospital was, as you can imagine, segregated, but it was almost a comical thing. It was as if they had drawn like a line down the middle of the hospital, the black side and the white side, but everything was separate. There were separate rooms, separate equipment, separate staff, and as Joan found out on that very first day, separate linens for the beds. You see, she went to the linen closet on her side of the hospital, which she was in charge of, and saw that they were stained and torn. They were not even folded correctly, and she was absolutely outraged. She asked where the rest of the linens could possibly be. And the nurse next to her said, well, there are linens on the white side of the hospital. So Joan, because Joan is, well, Joan, marched over that imaginary but very palpable line between the black and the white side of the hospital, marched into the linen closet on the white side and loaded up baskets to bring to the other side of the hospital. As you can imagine, people were rather taken aback. But the truth is she actually benefited from the element of surprise. Nobody had ever tried to do such a thing. This was so crazy, they were not even poised and ready to act. And they just watched as she and her nurses filled these baskets and brought them back to the hospital. She ordered her nurses to put them on the beds, and nobody said a word. Oh yeah, there were repercussions. People talked behind her back. They called her names. They made sure that she heard what they were saying. There were actually even along the way a couple of death threats to her and her husband, but pretty soon everything settled down into an air of respect. They knew that she was strong and determined, and she didn't take no for an answer. So when we were on that pier together, and my husband was sailing away for 6 months, it really was the beginning of a very changed relationship. As you can imagine, babies really do heal everything, and when my daughter came, we would bond over how much we loved her, and we bonded over how much we loved it when she would go to try to pick up the Encyclopedia Britannica that she loved so much, and she would open it up and go through the pages of the transparencies that had the heart. Do you know them? It is so cool. And she would go through this for hours, and oh, that just touched Joan's heart. And she also would beg to watch surgery on the Discovery Channel. Basically, that's all they used to show. She was 4 years old, and she would say, "I have been waiting my whole life to do this." Joan loved this, and Joan gave her her first stethoscope, the one that she had received when she graduated from nursing school. It was a lovely relationship they had, and she and I also grew to have a great relationship, because the truth is, both of us knew the right way to do everything. So we understood that, and God bless my family when we joined forces, because it was really quite a force to be reckoned with. But we have been very lucky to have this wonderful, wonderful woman in our family. So when we got a phone call from the hospice a few years ago, and we knew that these were really her last few hours, we rushed down to her, met Alex's brother, met my sister-in-law, and we went to the room. And during those hours, my husband read to her from the Bible and sat by her bedside, and she was in a state where her eyes were glazed over. I don't think she really could see anything. She was, there were labored breaths, and we knew that there wasn't much time. And I've heard that this happens in the moment when my husband and his brother stepped out of the room. That's when we heard the very sudden breaths that came very quickly and then stopped in an instant. And she was gone. And we really think that she didn't want her sons to see that final moment because it would hurt them too much. So when she died, I was there, and my sister-in-law was there too, and the doctor was there. This was not the hospice doctor. It was her granddaughter, Elise.
Wow.
Who, by the way, is also strong and determined and doesn't take no for an answer.
Wow.
Thank you.
Aye.